Now we would like to call on Dr. Zhang for his comments. Please.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me as a commentator on Professor Wei's talk. First, let me summarize his talk. First, this paper found a significant negative effect of the trade war on the viewership of U.S. movies, American soft power in China. So the effect is driven by Chinese citizens' choice and not by either an income effect or a Chinese government action. And also the effect is persistent, at least to 2021. I think this paper is very interesting. I like this paper very much. So this paper, give us an important research question. It has great data and excellent empirical strategy and strong evidence. I don't have a very technical question on economic metrics. I only have several more general questions, a comment. First one, so its paper found the negative effect is milder for more affluent people. So the attitude of the more affluent families who are able to send their children abroad appear to be less affected by the trade war. So more affluent people are likely to be more educated people. However, the U.S. Trade war, I mean the U.S. tariff and the violation of WTO rule, Huawei ban, and semiconductor export control has dramatically changed the attitudes of many more educated Chinese people, even including those elites and researchers who received PhD from American universities to the U.S. Of course, I mean their attitude toward U.S. Became from positive to more negative. This is my first comment. I think that it's very crucial for the American soft power in China. So my second comment is the creative goods as a form of soft power. So this paper focuses on the movies and American branded automobiles, but other creative goods such as drama, music, and books can also be regarded as a form of soft power. According to UNCTAD, so the creative goods include art crafts, audiovisuals, which includes film, CD, DVDs, and other design and publishing, including books and newspapers. They also can be regarded as a form of soft power. And so this figure shows, at the left side, shows the China's imports of audiovisual, and the right side shows the China's imports of books. So you can see after the trade war in 2018, China's imports of audiovisual and books declined sharply. On the other hand, imports from the rest of the world increased. So there's quite different trends. So basically, these findings is consistent with Professor Wei's finding. But as a whole, maybe the effect is a little bit short-lived, and you can see the China's imports of all creative goods declined after the trade war, but it increased in 2021, both from the U.S., from Japan, and from the rest of the world. I think the interesting case is the case of Senkaku Ryoyu Island dispute in 2012. So you can see there's a nationwide anti-Japanese campaign in China in 2012. So the imports of creative goods from Japan decreased sharply. But in recent years, so there's visiting Japan boom and the boom of the Japanese cartoon and music. So the imports of creative goods increased again. So my third comment is more general. It's about in the long run. So this figure shows the American soft power is declining with the hard power. So the American's GDP is declining from 28% to 30% in the last 2 decades, and also its exports of creative goods also declined during the last 20 years. So if we look at the decomposition, so you can see even the books of U.S. export books declined sharply, and the publishing also declined. Almost all the category, the share of by the U.S. declined. In contrast, China's soft power is increasing with hard powers. So the exports creative goods from China's shares increasing. Even we look at the decomposition subcategories, we can see the export of Chinese books and audio videos also increased steady in the past 20 years. So I think this in the long run, so the U.S. soft power is declining over time. That's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhang. Next, we would like to call on Professor Sahashi for his comments, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Wei, for excellent and very smart presentation. And this is very interesting. And I think some of the audience may have a question. Why American movies is that important? I mean, there are so many American movies, and it is not always about American image. Yeah, you are right. You know, thousands of movies every year created by United States. But please look at the data. Actually, Professor Wei has not shown that slide to you today, but in China, recently, the top sale of American movies is like Avengers or like a Spider-Man, Maverick movies, right? And if you're familiar with Maverick movies, they are really American movies, right? Always with stars and stripes, right? So yeah, so from that perspective, I really concur with kind of problem setting by Professor and his colleagues on the American national image and, and soft power and the U.S.-China relations as a whole, try to find the connection between them. But having said that, I have my first, and also this is a really important study because as Senior Fellow Chan said, the mechanism, or the relationship between US and China is not always created by the governments, right? As according to this study, people or citizens really matters. In selecting which products, which service they want to use. So this is fantastic from that angle. But having said that, I have just a few questions. I only have 3 minutes to go. So first question is, I still not clear about the problem setting in the very beginning. That is, if what you said is, if they agree with U.S. trade war as a lightness action against unfair trade conduct or just as a barrier tactic. So you try to argue, the problem from lightfulness of American action and, Chinese people's, purchasing behavior. But I think, the lightfulness is really important angle. But I think this might be because just a simple nationalism, right? This is very difficult for me as a political scientist. I'm a political scientist, sorry. I'm not economist in this panel today. But I'm a political scientist, so, nationalism is not always, same to rightful understanding of people's understanding on rightfulness of some country's action. But for me, the behavior, change of behavior might be explained well by the, kind of nationalism among Chinese consumers. So this is my first question. And second question is about soft power. Of course, as political scientist, I'm a very good reader of, Joe Nye's book. This is a translation of Joe Nye's book, Smart Power. This is also my favorite book. Having said that, soft power should be, as Professor Wei mentioned very clearly, something to induce people without resorting to, some hard power. But I think that what you explained today is just a kind of change of purchasing behavior, right? But what really matters in terms of soft power is, so America can change Chinese government or China itself or not, right? So today, what is, dependent variable today is just a kind of purchasing behavior. So I think this is not well categorized in the discussion of soft power. But I might be wrong, in understanding like this. But even if we accept this is a discussion of soft power, I have just two questions. First one is, yes, American soft power or attractiveness in terms of goods might be, yes, should be reduced after the tariff war. But actually, I concur with Chan's point. That is this short-lived or not? Because even after Trump, Biden administration kept the same strategy and economic shutdown to China. So, but people might be used to that, get used to that, right? If so, they may be more open-minded to watch the American movies and Avengers because that's a fantastic movie, right? So I think my first question is, for this point, is this short-lived or not? The kind of longevity of the effect. And the second, this is my last point, is I think from the perspective of American soft power, even if they lost some chance to sell their movies in China, that might be good for American soft power overall to the world. Because to adjust themselves to Chinese market, to sell their ticket in Chinese market, sometimes they have to adjust the substance to Chinese market. Like, I don't need to say about kind of some ending of a Disney movie, slightly changed from world version, Chinese version, or you may also know about the story of Mulan of Disney. But I think if United States and entertainment industry might be less interested in Chinese market, that may enable them to create their entertainment series without considering so much about Chinese market, then that might increase the American soft power overall. This is my last comment.
Thank you very much, Professor Sahashi. I think Professor Wei can answer.
Sure, okay. So first of all, let me note when RIETI was kindly arranging this talk, I suggested to RIETI to invite a political scientist and economist to comment on this, to enrich our discussion. So I'm very grateful to both Dr. Cho and Professor Sahashi for their very insightful comments, enriching our understanding about this subject. On their specific comments, let me make a few responses or maybe additional comments. First, I'm glad to note that Dr. Zhang noted that the paper also looking to how persistent the effect is, something that Professor Sahashi also mentioned. I didn't have time to describe in my initial presentation. Indeed, we look at, Trump has left office. Not only Trump has left office, after a few years, the Chinese could forget about what has happened during the trade war and go back to what they used to do. Something we can check in the data because we can get more recent movie viewership data, and our research paper actually does produce that table. And I'm glad that Dr. Zhang noticed that if you look at more recent U.S. movie viewership, across different parts of China relative to the pre-trade war period, you find continued negative effect of the trade war on U.S. movie viewership in regions more exposed to the tariff, suggesting that at least the effect seems to be very persistent, at least to today. So I think that's perhaps worth noting. So in other words, as far as recent data, as far as available recent data shows, we continue to see the effect. Would it last for another 5 years or 10 years? We'll know when the new data becomes available. Professor Dr. Zhang's note of a broader category of creative goods. That's such a very good point. That's aligned with our thinking. Indeed, music, books, and all of those creative products, at least in the eyes of Joseph Nye, Professor Joseph Nye, and in our view, are all potentially part of proxies for U.S. soft power. I strongly suspect they will share similar features. We don't have equally good data. The movie data just uniquely good. We can account for regional showing. We can account for quality of movies by movie title. We cannot do the same thing for other categories of creative goods. But my strong suspicion, consistent with what Dr. Zhang says, is that they will reflect the same kind of patterns. Professor Sahashi's comments. One is about how well do those goods correspond to our notion of soft power. Two things. One is movies are one of those examples that Joseph Nye, the person who proposed the idea of soft power, mentioned as an example of a soft power. Now, of course, U.S. ability to induce others to do things it desires can include induce other governments to do things it wants or other people to do things that it wants. I think both are part of the dimensions of soft power. Has U.S. succeeded in getting Chinese government to do things differently or not? It's debatable. I mean, we don't, as a data-based social scientist, I can imagine very different assessment. It's not easily conclude that Chinese government has changed its way of doing things because of a U.S. actions. It's actually equally hard research question. How do we know whether people have changed their mind or not? So one way to view today's project or today's presentation is that it suggests one way to measure Chinese people's perception of U.S. soft power, U.S. value, as reflected in movies and as reflected in purchase of goods. We are not saying that people have stopped watching Chinese movies. We are not. In fact, the data does not support the idea that people have stopped watching American movies. We also show note that the state-controlled companies that are responsible for importing U.S. movies continue to import as many U.S. movies as during the trade war years as before the trade war time. So interestingly, in this case, the state-owned firms did not choose to import fewer movies. When they get distributed to individual theaters, they are overwhelmingly owned by private companies. What we see is people in Shanghai, Beijing, Chengdu regions that are less exposed to Trump trade war continue to watch a lot of American movies. People in more exposed regions, they are more exposed to Trump tariff, choose to watch significantly fewer U.S. movies and replacing U.S. movies by watching more Chinese movies. So it does seem to reflect choices of people. It is a dimension of U.S. soft power. It's not all dimension of U.S. soft power in our view. Professor Sahashi made a very interesting point about to the extent that fewer Chinese audience watch U.S. movies, could that be better for US in terms of soft power elsewhere? Certainly interesting question to ask. As a database scientist, I want to have a database answer. But here I will note that even with the trade war, for many US movie studios, China is the second biggest market for them. So it's very hard for them, unless China shut down imports of US movies, it's very hard for them to ignore the commercial appeal of Chinese market. As long as the Chinese government doesn't respond, so far, a fraction of Chinese consumers respond. That's not enough for American movie studios to do things differently. If the Chinese government says no more US movies, perhaps they will say, okay, in that case, let's do something differently. So that's one. And two, in the aggregate US movie exports, we can check what happens to US movie export during the Trump trade war years in markets other than China. And data suggests you also see a decline. Now, so the decline in US movie sales in markets other than China is consistent with the idea that perhaps people elsewhere in general do not like the way President Trump managed its trade policy. It's not a proof because we are not able to use the same kind of statistical methodology to examine this. But the decline in US movie sales at least is consistent with the idea that people elsewhere probably don't like trade war that much either. So let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the fruitful discussion. Okay, because time is running out, so we have to stop here. And in closing, I'd like to thank Professor Wei again. We have given eye-opener as well as a very meaningful lesson. Okay, thank you very much for your participation, and that concludes today's BBL webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.